There is a yellow dog somewhere in the land of Ooh right now. He is probably lying in a sun patch on the floor of a treehouse. Maybe his legs are stretched out so long they loop around the room twice and come back to touch his chin. Maybe he is making bacon pancakes, singing to himself in a voice that sounds too happy for this hour of the morning. Maybe he is having what he would call a deep thought, which could mean anything from genuinely pondering the nature of the universe to wondering whether sandwiches taste better when they are eaten sideways. His name is Jake, and he might be the wisest character in all of Adventure Time. Not because he has read every book. Not because he is ancient or has lived through centuries of war the way Marceline has. Not because he possesses God-level power the way the Lich does, or near-infinite scientific knowledge the way Princess Bubblegum does. Jake is wise in the way that is harder to quantify and even harder to teach. He is wise the way that certain people in your life are wise. The ones who seem to handle things with a kind of effortless clarity that makes you feel like you have been overthinking everything your whole life. He does not lecture. He does not build a podium and stand on it. His wisdom arrives sideways, tucked into something he says, while stretching one arm all the way across the room to grab a snack. It lands gently, the way a good idea always lands, not with force, but with the sudden quiet weight of recognition. Adventure Time ran for 10 seasons between 2010 and 2018, and then continued in spirit through the Distant Lands specials on HBO Max that ran through 2021. It was created by Pendleton Ward and aired on Cartoon Network, and it was one of those rare things in any medium. A piece of work that was exactly what it appeared to be on the surface while also being something entirely different underneath. On the surface, a cartoon about a human boy and his magical dog going on adventures in a post-apocalyptic fantasy land. Underneath, a meditation on growing up, on loss, on the nature of good and evil, on what it means to live a life with purpose, and on how to be a person in a world that is equal parts wonderful and genuinely terrifying. Jake the dog was voiced throughout the series by John DiMaggio, a performance so perfectly calibrated to the character that it is almost impossible to imagine anyone else doing it. DiMaggio found the exact frequency where relaxed humor and genuine emotional warmth exist simultaneously, a kind of vocal warmth that makes Jake feel like someone you have actually known, like that friend who never seems stressed about anything, and somehow that makes everything feel more manageable just by being near them. Jake is in the simplest terms a magical dog. He is a golden yellow English bulldog with enormous eyes and the ability to stretch, grow, shrink, and reshape his body into essentially any form he desires. He can become a horse, a submarine, a parachute, a gigantic monster large enough to fight celestial beings. He can make himself small enough to crawl through a keyhole and broad enough to be a bridge across a chasm. He is, from a purely mechanical standpoint, extraordinarily powerful. But here is the thing that Adventure Time does with that power that is so interesting. Jake uses it lazily. He uses maybe 20% of what he is actually capable of, and his creator Pendleton Ward said in interviews that Jake does not even really know the full extent of what he can do. He is a being of nearly unlimited physical capability who primarily uses that capability to be comfortable, to keep his friends safe, and to avoid doing things the hard way when there is an easier way available. And far from making him seem foolish or wasteful, that choice, because it is a choice, whether Jake consciously makes it or not, turns out to be one of the most quietly philosophical things about him. So settle in, get comfortable, let your mind rest wherever it wants to rest while this unfolds. Because tonight we are going to spend a long time with Jake the dog. We are going to look at the philosophy woven into who he is, how he thinks, how he loves, how he handles fear and failure and change and death. We are going to trace the arc of a character who begins the series as a lovable sidekick and ends it as something closer to a statement about how to live. And we are going to do it the way Jake would want, slowly, thoroughly, without any rush at all. If you are watching this right now, drop a comment below and tell me where you are and what time it is. I love knowing who is out there. And if you have not subscribed yet, now would be a great time. Hit that button and join the rest of the people falling asleep to this. Section 1. The Cosmic Accident, who Jake actually is and why that matters. Before we can understand Jake's philosophy, we need to understand what Jake actually is. Because the answer to that question is stranger than most people who watched Adventure Time casually might realize, and that strangeness is not incidental to who Jake is. It is fundamental to it. Jake the dog was born from a boil on his father's head. That sentence requires context, but it also kind of stands on its own as a statement. There is something almost mythologically absurd about it. The way creation myths from every culture contain some element of the deeply strange, some primordial weirdness at the root of a being's existence. Jake's origin is exactly that. Before he was Jake, he was a kind of biological inheritance, a consequence of an encounter between his father Joshua, a dog who worked as a detective adventurer, and an extra-dimensional alien shapeshifter named Warren Ampersand. Warren, it would eventually be revealed in the show's final season, had traveled to the land of Ooh with a specific purpose. He was a parasitic entity, shapeshifter, who could not maintain his own power indefinitely, and had developed a method of harvesting that power from children he deliberately seeded into the world. He would bite an animal, inject his shape-shifting DNA through that bite, and wait for that DNA to produce an offspring with his abilities. Then, when the time came, he would return and drain that offspring to extend his own life. He had apparently done this countless times across countless worlds. Joshua was bitten during an investigation alongside his wife, Margaret. The bite produced a large, strange growth on Joshua's head. When that growth eventually burst, Jake emerged, a puppy with golden fur and, though no one quite understood it yet, the capacity to reshape his body at will. Joshua and Margaret raised Jake as their own son, alongside their existing natural-born child Jermaine, and later, a human infant they found abandoned in the woods, Finn, who would become Jake's closest companion and adoptive brother. Now, the reason Jake's origin matters so deeply to his philosophy is this: Jake spent virtually his entire life not knowing any of this. He believed for most of the show's run that his powers came from rolling in a magical mud puddle as a puppy. A magical mud puddle, that is his explanation. Not a scientific account of alien DNA or extra-dimensional inheritance, a puddle. He rolled in it. Now he can be a blimp, case closed, moving on. There is something beautiful and deliberately chosen about this. Jake is not troubled by the mystery of his own nature. He does not spend long nights wondering where he comes from or what his powers truly are. He exists in a state of comfortable self-acceptance that does not require full self-knowledge. He knows he can stretch. He knows he is a dog. He knows he loves Finn and Lady Rainicorn and bacon pancakes and jazz. Beyond that, the metaphysics can wait. This is not ignorance in the pejorative sense. This is a kind of practical wisdom that takes a very long time for most people to arrive at, if they ever arrive at it at all. The questions of where we came from, why we have the traits and tendencies we have, what the ultimate nature of our being truly is, these are not questions that most of us can fully answer. We can spend tremendous energy pursuing them, and that pursuit can be valuable. But it can also become a trap, the trap of making meaning contingent on certainty, of deciding that we cannot be fully ourselves until we fully understand ourselves. Jake never falls into that trap. He is fully himself at every moment, regardless of what he does or does not know about the deeper architecture of his existence. His parents Joshua and Margaret were, by all accounts, loving and good. Joshua was perhaps somewhat demanding in his approach to toughening up his children. There is a famous episode called Dad's Dungeon, in which Finn and Jake discover that Joshua left behind a series of pre-recorded holo messages designed to guide them through a dungeon he built, with challenges designed to push Finn's growth. Joshua's messages are gruff, frequently dismissive, and occasionally cruel in that old-fashioned way of thinking that hardship is the only teacher worth having. Jake does not entirely agree with his father's methods. He says so quietly in the way he always says the important things, not dramatically, not with great fanfare, but clearly. And yet Jake also carries his father with him. When Jake's children are born and he puts on a father's hat to mark the occasion, the hat he chooses is Joshua's hat. Not because Joshua was a perfect father, but because love is not conditional on perfection, and gratitude is not the same as unconditional agreement. Margaret, Jake's mother, had passed away before the events of the main series. This is confirmed but never dwelt upon extensively. Jake grieves the way he handles most difficult things, with a kind of quiet acknowledgement that this is a reality of the world, that love includes loss, that being alive means eventually saying goodbye to people. He does not make it a constant performance of grief. He simply carries the fact of her death the way people carry such things, present but not paralyzing. Jake also has a half-brother, Jermaine, who is Joshua and Margaret's biological son. Jermaine and Jake are brothers in the fullest sense, though they are fundamentally different people in their relationship to the world. Jermaine is more serious, more responsible, more burdened by obligation. He spent years after his parents' deaths guarding their home against the demons that Joshua had made bargains with. While Jake was out adventuring, Jermaine was keeping the lights on and the monsters at bay, and he was not entirely happy about it. This dynamic matters because it illuminates something about Jake by contrast. Jake did not choose the path of duty and guardianship, he chose the path of adventure and presence. Some would call that irresponsibility. The show asks you to consider whether it might instead be a considered choice, a decision about which obligations matter most and how to fulfill them. The relationship between Jake's origin story and his worldview runs deeper still when you consider the eventual revelation about Warren Ampersand. When Jake finally meets his biological alien father in the show's final season, Warren presents himself as a figure of destiny, a dying patriarch who has come to retrieve his son, who has built an entire world in Jake's honor, who offers Jake the mantle of galactic savior. It is an intensely seductive offer wrapped in the language of love and legacy. Jake does not fall for it. He figures out the manipulation. He discovers that the entire planet is just Warren stretched into architectural forms, that the civilization, the worshippers, the prophecy, all of it was fabricated by a single selfish creature trying to harvest what he needs from a child he deliberately created as a resource. Jake does not hesitate. He throws Warren Ampersand into a black hole, not with anger necessarily, with clarity. Because Jake understands something that Adventure Time returns to over and over, the difference between family and the people who created you. Joshua and Margaret made him a home and gave him love. Warren Ampersand gave him DNA and then tried to take it back. One of those is a parent. The other is a parasite. Jake knows which is which. This is the root of so much of Jake's philosophy. Identity is not a matter of origin. It is a matter of choice, continuity, and love. Who you are is not determined by what you were made from. It is determined by what you make of what you were given and who you choose to make it with. He was born from a boil on his father's head, descended from a manipulative alien shapeshifter who saw him as nothing more than a renewable power source. He became someone who makes bacon pancakes and writes dating advice books under the pseudonym JT. Dog Zone, and once spent several days being a brick because he had always wanted to know what that was like. The distance between those two things is not an accident, it is a life. Section 2. The stretch philosophy, identity, adaptability, and the power of not knowing your limits. Jake's most obvious characteristic. The thing that makes him distinctive in a visual sense, the thing that defines his power set, is his ability to stretch. He can extend any part of his body to enormous lengths, compress himself into a tiny ball, grow to the size of a skyscraper, or reshape himself into virtually any object or creature he can imagine. He is a living metaphor, and Adventure Time knows it and does not try to hide the fact. The philosophical resonance of Jake's stretching is multifaceted, and it rewards looking at from several different angles. The first and most obvious reading is adaptability. Jake can become whatever the situation requires. When Finn needs a bridge, Jake becomes a bridge. When they need a submarine, Jake becomes a submarine. When someone needs to be caught from a great height, Jake's arms extend into an impossibly long net. He is never rigid, never fixed, never unable to respond to the specific demands of whatever is happening. He meets reality as it is, not as he might prefer it to be. This is a genuinely rare quality in anyone, fictional or otherwise. Most of us have a fairly limited range of adaptive response to the challenges in our lives. We have our default modes, our habituated reactions, our preferred ways of being in the world, and when circumstances fall outside those familiar patterns, we feel the friction of that. Jake does not seem to feel that friction. Or perhaps more accurately, Jake feels it and adjusts where most people feel it and resist. The second reading is something more subtle. Jake uses his powers lazily. This is a canonical fact about the character, confirmed by the show's creator. He does not push himself to discover the outer limits of what he can do. He finds a comfortable range of application and stays there. He has been shown in certain desperate moments to access capabilities far beyond what he normally employs, but those moments require extreme circumstances to bring about. Now this could be read as a flaw, a character with God-level potential settling for mortal-level effort, but the show consistently frames it not as failure but as choice. Jake is not striving toward maximum capability because maximum capability is not his goal. His goal is a good life with the people he loves. His goal is adventure and warmth and creative satisfaction and excellent sandwiches. He does not need to be everything he could possibly be in order to be everything he needs to be. The gap between maximum potential and actual deployment is not a shame gap. It is for Jake a contentment gap. He is content with what he uses because what he uses is enough for what he wants. There is something almost radical about this in the contemporary context. We live in a world that is obsessed with the notion of potential, of maximizing human output, of never leaving capability on the table, of constant self-improvement towards some asymptotic ideal of performance. Jake represents a gentle refusal of that framework. Not because growth is bad, but because growth for its own sake, growth without purpose, growth as an end rather than a means, is not wisdom. It is anxiety dressed up as productivity. There is also something important in the physical quality of how Jake stretches. He never breaks. He can be pulled, twisted, shaped, compressed, elongated, and he always returns. His body is not brittle. There are limits, as the show demonstrates in an episode called The Limit. Jake's mass is finite, and if he spreads himself across too great a distance, he becomes dangerously thin. But within those limits, he is extraordinarily resilient. Resilience is a word that gets thrown around a lot in conversations about mental health and personal development, and sometimes it gets flattened into a kind of toxic positivity, just bounce back, just be resilient, that misses the actual meaning. Real resilience is not the absence of damage. It is the capacity to return to something like yourself after damage has been done. It is not imperviousness, it is recovery. Jake's body is a visual illustration of exactly that. He gets stretched and then he comes back. He gets compressed and then he expands. He gets twisted into forms entirely unlike his default shape, and then, when the need for that shape passes, he reassembles himself into something that is recognizably Jake. This matters because it mirrors the way he handles difficulty in life. When Finn goes through the terrible, bewildering pain of his relationship with Flame Princess, Jake is there, not trying to compress his brother's feelings into something manageable, not trying to stretch the situation into a different shape by offering false comfort but present. Flexible, able to be whatever Finn needs without losing himself in the process. When Jake's children are born and grow up at an impossibly rapid rate, Rainicorn offspring mature in days rather than years, Jake does not shatter under the disorientation. He stretches to accommodate the new shape of his life. It is uncomfortable. It is confusing. He does not always do it gracefully, but he does it. Then there is the question of what it means that Jake's shape-shifting is inherited from Warren Ampersand, a being defined by its total dissolution of self, a creature that became an entire fake civilization, that stretched its body into buildings and population and sky in order to deceive and consume. Warren's version of shape-shifting is a form of predatory emptiness, the ability to be everything and therefore nothing, to simulate presence as a form of violent absence. Jake has the same raw ability, and he uses it completely differently. Jake shapes himself in response to the world and the people around him, not to trap or consume them, but to serve and protect them. He uses the capacity for infinite form in the service of loyal, specific love. The power is the same, the philosophy behind its use is the opposite. That contrast, having a destructive capability and choosing constructive application, is one of the clearest statements Adventure Time makes about the relationship between nature and character. You are not defined by what you can do, you are defined by what you choose to do with it. And what Jake chooses to do overwhelmingly is make breakfast and save his brother and tell the truth about how he feels and go on adventures, and be genuinely, fully, magnificently himself in every situation he encounters. He can be anything. He chooses to be Jake, and that turns out to be the best possible thing to be. Section 3. Sucking at something is the first step. Jake's philosophy on failure, growth, and the art of just trying. If you have spent any time around Adventure Time fan communities, you have probably encountered one particular Jake quote so frequently that it almost becomes wallpaper. It is maybe the most shared line he ever says, the one that ends up on motivational posts and profile bios and phone wallpapers. And it deserves every single bit of that attention, because the more you look at it, the more it contains. Dude, sucking at something is the first step towards being sorta good at something. There is the version of that sentiment that exists in a dozen self-help books and TED Talks and productivity podcasts. The framing is usually something like, embrace failure as a learning experience, treat setbacks as feedback, adopt a growth mindset. That framing is not wrong. But it is also frequently delivered with a kind of solemn earnestness that makes it feel like medicine, good for you, but difficult to swallow without making a face. Jake's version is different in a way that is easy to miss on first pass. He does not say you will become great. He says you will become sorta good. That qualifier sorta is doing an enormous amount of philosophical work. It removes the performance pressure. It eliminates the implication that the purposes of sucking at something is to eventually dominate at it. The goal is not mastery. The goal is competence. The goal is getting from bad to okay, from okay to pretty good, from pretty good to genuinely enjoyable. This matters because so much of the reason people do not try things is not fear of permanent failure. It is fear of the intermediate period, the embarrassing stretch where you are clearly trying and clearly not succeeding in a way that is visible to others. Jake's philosophy locates that period not as a shameful necessary evil on the road to glory, but as the actual substance of the journey. You suck, then you get sorta good. That is not a detour, that is the path. There is a specific context in Adventure Time where this quote is delivered that is worth noting. It comes from an early moment in the series where Finn is learning to do something, attempting to become better at a skill, discouraged by how much he currently struggles with it. Jake offers the observation not as a grand philosophical statement, but as something so obvious that it barely needs saying. It is delivered with the lightness of someone stating the weather. The profundity is entirely casual, entirely incidental. That quality, wisdom without fanfare, is one of Jake's most consistent characteristics. He also demonstrates this philosophy in action repeatedly in ways that are easy to overlook. Jake makes bacon pancakes. He makes them often, and he sings about them, and it is one of the most beloved recurring moments in the entire series. The song is simple and joyful and slightly absurd, a little improvised melody about the act of cooking. He did not write it to perform for anyone. He sings it because he is happy to be making bacon pancakes. That happiness is the product of repeated practice in a small domestic skill. Jake has made bacon pancakes enough times that they are effortless and pleasing to him. He probably sucked at them at some point. He obviously does not suck at them anymore. The journey from suck to sorta good happened in real kitchens over real mornings, and what remained on the other end is this: A man singing to himself about breakfast because cooking has become a source of genuine joy. Jake is also a musician. He plays the viola, a detail that is easily missed because it comes up somewhat obliquely. He and Lady Rainicorn share a passion for it. Music is woven into how Jake experiences the world. He hums and improvises and treats sound as an ambient expression of mood. And jazz, in particular, the kind of music built on improvisation, on the relationship between structure and freedom, on the willingness to play something unexpected in the gap between written notes, feels like the perfect art form for Jake's philosophy. Jazz is an art form that absolutely requires being willing to sound bad. You cannot improvise without risk, and risk without failure is not risk at all. Every jazz musician has played notes that did not work, combinations that clashed, moments where the room went quiet in the wrong way. And the tradition of jazz says that is not a mistake to be hidden or apologized for. That is data. That is the sound of someone reaching towards something they have not found yet, and the reaching is as valuable as the finding. Jake plays music the way he lives, not obsessively, not with grinding self-improvement as the goal, but with genuine enjoyment of the process and a relaxed relationship with imperfection. There is a passage in how Jake approaches adventure itself that connects here. He and Finn go on quests that often have no clear outcome, no guaranteed success, no prior knowledge of whether the situation will end well. Jake does not refuse to engage with these quests because he cannot be sure of succeeding. He does not require certainty as a condition of participation. He stretches out his arms and enters the dungeon or the Cloud Kingdom or the Spirit Realm or wherever they happen to be going, and he figures it out as he goes. This is an approach to uncertainty that feels almost counterintuitive, given how much human psychology is organized around the desire to reduce uncertainty before acting. We plan, we research. We wait for the right time, the right conditions, the right level of readiness. Jake does not particularly believe in waiting for readiness. Readiness, from Jake's perspective, is something you discover in the middle of doing the thing, not something you achieve before you start. His relationship with failure also connects to how he handles being wrong. Jake is wrong fairly often. He has bad ideas. He gives advice that turns out to be questionable. He misreads situations. He sometimes does not take things as seriously as they perhaps deserve to be taken, and those moments of casual inattention occasionally have consequences. But Jake does not catastrophize being wrong. He does not collapse into self-recrimination or spiral into long periods of shame processing. He acknowledges the error, adjusts, and moves. There is a lightness to how he holds his own fallibility that looks like carelessness from a distance, but is actually something more sophisticated. An understanding that the error is part of the process, not a referendum on his worth as a person. The world he lives in, the land of Ooh, is a post-apocalyptic landscape shaped by a nuclear catastrophe 1,000 years before the series begins. There is genuine suffering in that world. People die, relationships end. The Ice King, one of the show's most recurring characters, is a man who lost his mind and his identity and the woman he loved all at once due to a magical crown whose power he could not resist. The Lich, the primary villain of the series, is a being of pure death and nihilism. In this world, Jake's casual equanimity with failure and imperfection is not naivety. It is a survival strategy that has clearly worked. He has watched the world enough to know that treating your own mistakes as catastrophes only compounds them. That the difference between a setback and a disaster is partly determined by how you hold the setback in the first place. Suck at something, then get sorta good at it, and enjoy the whole thing more than you may be expected to. That is the instruction. It is so simple it sounds like nothing. It is actually almost everything. Section 4. To live life, you need problems. Jake's stoic relationship with suffering and meaning. There is a second Jake quote that circulates almost as widely as the sucking at something one, and it is arguably even more philosophically dense. It comes from a moment in the series where Jake is reflecting on the nature of existence, on what makes a life feel worthwhile, on the relationship between desire and satisfaction. To live life, you need problems. If you get everything you want the minute you want it, what's the point of living? This is not a comfortable idea. It does not fit neatly into the contemporary cultural appetite for optimization and frictionless experience and the removal of obstacles. It pushes back against the widespread assumption that the ideal state of human life would be one in which every need is immediately met and every desire is instantaneously fulfilled. Jake is saying that a life without problems is not a solved life, it is an empty one. The philosophical tradition that most clearly resonates with this view is Stoicism, though Jake would not know that word and would probably not care about it if he did. The Stoics, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, shared a conviction that difficulty, hardship, and challenge are not unfortunate interruptions to the good life but constitutive elements of it. That virtue, which for the Stoics was the only real good, could not be developed in the absence of adversity to exercise it against. That a person who never faced difficulty had no opportunity to discover, let alone strengthen their capacity for wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline. There is also a connection here to what the philosopher Albert Camus described when he wrote about the absurdity of human existence, the gap between the human desire for meaning and the universe's failure to provide it on demand. Camus' response to this absurdity was not despair but engagement, the recommendation to imagine Sisyphus happy, to embrace the struggle as the substance of being alive rather than as an obstacle between us and the life we are supposed to be having. Jake arrives at a similar place without the continental philosophy vocabulary. He arrives at it through experience, through having actually lived enough of life to notice that the moments of greatest meaning and deepest satisfaction tend to cluster around difficulty overcome, not comfort maintained. The adventure that mattered was not the one that went smoothly. It was the one where they almost did not make it, and then did. This philosophy shows up in how Jake relates to Finn's development, particularly in the earlier seasons. Finn is 14 when the series begins, a teenager with enormous physical courage and an equally enormous emotional fragility. He falls hard and fast for Princess Bubblegum, who does not return his feelings in the same way. He later falls just as hard for Flame Princess, with whom he has a painful and complicated relationship that eventually ends. Jake does not try to protect Finn from any of this. He does not arrange circumstances to smooth the emotional path. He watches and he is present, and when Finn is in the middle of genuine heartbreak, Jake is there. But the heartbreak itself is allowed to happen. It is not circumvented. Because Jake understands clearly, without making a speech about it, that Finn needs to go through these things. That the pain of losing something you wanted is not a malfunction in the system of growing up. It is the system. There is a sequence in the early seasons where Jake offers Finn advice about relationships using a dating methodology he has developed, which he presents with complete confidence and which turns out to be hilariously unreliable in practice. The methodology involves tiers of romantic development. It is specific and slightly ridiculous and absolutely sincere. And when it fails, when following Jake's advice produces results that were not anticipated, Jake does not completely abandon the framework. He acknowledges the failure and reflects, he updates. His advice about relationships over the course of the show becomes subtler and more honest as the seasons progress, tracking his own growth as someone who has had to navigate a committed relationship with Lady Rainicorn, while simultaneously being an adventurer, a brother, and eventually a father. Jake's problems do not stay the same shape throughout the series. The problems of Season 1 Jake, navigating dungeons, dealing with the Ice King's penguin-stealing habits, figuring out how to help Finn with his crush, are genuinely different from the problems of later seasons Jake. Parenthood introduces an entirely new category of difficulty. The revelation about his alien biological heritage introduces another. The physical changes his body undergoes in the show's final stretch, turning blue, sprouting wings and extra eyes, gaining strange new sensory abilities, introduce yet another. Each of these presents Jake with the fundamental question his philosophy is built to answer. How do you remain yourself when the shape of your life keeps changing? The answer, as best as Jake demonstrates it, is this. You stay attached to the things that are genuinely yours, your relationships, your values, your sense of humor about the whole strange business of being alive, and you let the rest be flexible. The problems are not obstacles to your real life. They are what your real life is made of. You do not wait for the problems to end so that you can finally begin living. You live inside the problems, through the problems, with the problems as your companions and teachers. There is a famous piece of Stoic practice called negative visualization, the deliberate meditation on difficulty, loss, and what life would look like without the things you currently have. The purpose is not morbidity, it is gratitude. When you imagine losing what you love, you find your appreciation for it sharpened. When you sit with the possibility of difficulty, you discover that your capacity to endure is larger than you thought. Jake does not practice negative visualization consciously, but he seems to have arrived at its benefits naturally. He appreciates what he has with an intensity that is evident in the joy he takes in small things. Perfect sandwich, a sunny afternoon, a good song, a moment of quiet connection with someone he loves. That appreciation is only possible if you have, somewhere along the way, understood what the absence of those things would feel like. There is also something worth noting about how Jake's acceptance of problems interacts with his broader relationship with death and impermanence. The land of Ooo is genuinely dangerous. People get hurt. Characters die. The world has already been through one catastrophic apocalypse and comes close to another several times during the series. Jake is aware of this at all times and seems to have made a kind of peace with it. Not a numb or checked-out peace, but a lucid one. He knows that everything is temporary. He knows that his time with Finn will eventually end, that his children will outlive him in some ways and he will outlive them in others, that the treehouse will not stand forever, and his body has limits and even a magical dog cannot last forever. He lives inside that knowledge and chooses joy anyway. That is not denial. That is something much more difficult and much more admirable than denial. It is the decision, made over and over, that the problems and the impermanence and the risk are the price of admission for the beauty and love and adventure that make the whole thing worth it. You need the problems. Without them, you would not be living. You would just be waiting. Section 5, Jake the Brick, Stillness, Mindfulness, and the Art of Being Present in the World in November 2014, an episode of Adventure Time aired that is unlike almost anything else in the entire run of the series. It is called Jake the Brick, and it won an Emmy Award for short format animation. It is 11 minutes long, almost nothing happens in it, and it might be the episode that most completely illustrates what Jake's philosophy is actually about at its deepest level. The premise is this: Jake has apparently held a peculiar lifelong ambition to experience being a brick inside a collapsing shack. He wants to feel what it is like to be an inert building material at the moment the structure around him gives way. This is, on the surface, an extraordinarily odd thing to want. Finn supports it without fully understanding it, in the way that good brothers support things, and leaves Jake at the shack with a walkie-talkie so they can stay in contact. Jake transforms himself into a rectangular brick, positions himself in the wall of the dilapidated shack, and waits. And then something happens that Jake did not exactly anticipate. In the absence of anything to do, no quest to pursue, no enemies to fight, no friend to protect, he begins simply paying attention to the world around him. A rabbit lives nearby. The rabbit goes about its ordinary rabbit business. A deer appears. There is a rainstorm. Things happen, and then more things happen, all of them small, all of them in some sense insignificant, all of them part of the continuous unhurried flow of life that exists in every patch of land all the time, mostly unobserved. Jake starts narrating. He does not intend to narrate, it just happens. His voice through the walkie-talkie captures these tiny events with the reverence usually reserved for documentary accounts of grand historical moments. Finn, listening, is struck by what he hears. He puts the walkie-talkie on the frequency of a radio station. The station begins broadcasting Jake's narration. Across the land of Ooh, people stop what they are doing to listen. The Lich, still inhabiting the body of Tree Trunk's husband, Mr. Pig, listens. Princess Cookie, confined in a mental institution, listens. Banana Man, recently released from prison, listens. Everyone listens, because what Jake is describing, the ordinary persistent miracle of the living world going about its business, is something that no one usually gets to hear narrated with such complete and unhurried attention. The episode is a meditation on something that philosophy has addressed under various names: mindfulness, presence, the examined ordinary, the practice of attention. There is a Zen concept sometimes described as the ability to see the extraordinary within the ordinary, to perceive the fact of existence as perpetually astonishing rather than merely familiar. There is a Christian mystic tradition, particularly in figures like Thomas Merton or Brother Lawrence, of practicing the presence of divinity in the ordinary details of work and daily life. There is what the naturalist writer Annie Dillard was doing in Pilgrim at Tinker Creek when she sat for days observing a single creek bank in Virginia, finding the entire drama of life and death and struggle and beauty within the span of a few hundred square feet. Jake stumbles into all of this by deciding to be a brick for a while. The rabbit in the episode becomes the center of a small, complete story. Its burrow is destroyed by the deer, a rainstorm comes, more destruction follows. The rabbit is left without a home in a changed and more difficult landscape. Jake watches with complete attention, unable to do anything, immobilized by his own chosen form. And then the rabbit finds a hollowed log, makes it a home, adapts. The equilibrium is restored in a new and different form. Jake, watching this, has a thought that the episode allows to arrive quietly, without announcement. He has been a brick. He has been immobile, non-contributory, a piece of wall rather than an agent in the world. And he has watched a rabbit teach him more about life than most of his adventures have. Not because the rabbit was doing anything remarkable, but because Jake was actually watching. When the shack finally collapses, the original reason he was there, it is almost incidental. He is already done. He has already received something. He leaves the shack just before it comes down, like someone stepping out of a classroom after the lesson is finished, but the bell has not yet rung. The episode's central revelation is not that inaction is superior to action, or that meditation is more valuable than adventure. The revelation is that you have to be able to stop sometimes. That the capacity for stillness is not the opposite of the capacity for movement, it is its complement. You cannot be fully present in the middle of action unless you have practiced presence in the middle of stillness. You cannot really see the world unless you have occasionally made yourself stop and look at it without any agenda beyond the looking itself. Jake wins an Emmy for this, in a sense. Adventure Time wins the Emmy, but the episode is an act of advocacy for a way of being in the world that Jake embodies, available, attentive, curious about the small things, willing to forego doing in favor of simply being. It is also worth noting that Jake does this in a completely voluntary, self-motivated way. No one tells him to become a brick. No ancient wisdom text prescribes this particular practice. He just knows, in the way he always seems to know things, that there is something valuable in it. His instincts toward his own philosophical development are good, even when they manifest in forms that look bizarre from the outside. The people of Ooh who listen to his broadcast do not know that they needed this. They did not sign up for a radio narration of a Rabbit's Thursday. But when they hear it, something in them recognizes what it is: the simple fact of the world continuing to exist beautifully, without anyone's help or intervention, doing what it has always done in the patches of ground where no one is paying attention. Jake gave that to them by being a brick, by being still, by being willing to have absolutely nothing at stake for a few hours except the quality of his attention. There is also something quietly moving about how many characters across the land of Ooh stop to listen to Jake's narration. Even antagonists, even broken people, even those who have drifted into cruelty or madness, they all find something in those words. Because the capacity to be moved by the ordinary world is one of the things that remains even when most else is gone. It is near the bottom of what it means to be conscious and alive. Jake the Brick is a whole philosophy in 11 minutes. And the philosophy is essentially this: stop sometimes. Look at the thing in front of you. Not because it is magnificent, but because it is real, and real is more than enough. Section 6, The Language of Love, Jake and Lady Rainicorn, and what real commitment looks like. Lady Rainicorn is a creature of extraordinary beauty and slightly terrifying physical capability, a being that combines the elongated chromatic form of a rainicorn with the full emotional complexity of a person who has a rich inner life that most of the main cast can barely access. This is because Lady Rainicorn speaks Korean exclusively. Jake speaks Korean. The two of them have long, nuanced conversations that the audience largely receives as one-sided from Finn's perspective. He can hear Jake's responses, but Lady's words come to him as sound without accessible meaning. This detail, which could have been simply a recurring joke, becomes, over the course of the series, a surprisingly deep statement about intimacy. To love Lady Rainicorn fully, to be in genuine relationship with her, you have to be willing to do the work of learning her language. Jake did that work at some point before the series begins. Their relationship is already established, already serious, already characterized by the kind of ease and depth that takes years to build by the time we first see them together. Jake loves Lady Rainicorn in a way that the show portrays as complete and uncomplicated, which is interesting because most romantic relationships in Adventure Time are portrayed as complicated. Finn's romantic entanglements are consistently fraught. Princess Bubblegum is older and complicated. Flame Princess is dangerous and painful. Huntress Wizard is guarded and slow. Marceline and Princess Bubblegum's relationship is the subject of what appears to be centuries of emotional avoidance before it finally resolves into something open. Love in Adventure Time is generally presented as difficult, as something that requires navigation and growth and repeated failure and trying again. Jake and Lady are different. Not because their relationship is without challenges. Having 5 children who grow up in days, while Jake is still emotionally a fairly young being, is challenging. Not because they agree on everything, or because their lives fit together without friction, but because their commitment to each other is presented as a given, as a stable foundation from which everything else proceeds. It does not require constant maintenance in the dramatic sense. It is simply what it is, a real, settled, mutual love between two people who chose each other and keep choosing each other quietly every day. The way Jake talks about Lady Rainicorn is telling. He does not perform his love for her in the theatrical way that romanticized media often encourages. He does not make grand declarations or require the relationship to be constantly affirmed. He simply includes her in his life, references her naturally, consults her when there are things to consult about, misses her when they are apart in the way that you miss someone when their presence has become as natural as breathing. When Lady tells him she is pregnant in the Season 4 episode Lady and Peebles, Jake's initial reaction is a moment of stunned silence followed by the kind of joy that does not quite know how to contain itself. It is funny and genuine and a little terrifying in the best of way. He is not prepared. No one is ever prepared for this, but he commits immediately. He will be there. He will figure it out. The thing Jake gets right about love, and he gets a lot wrong too, as we will discuss, is the part about presence. He shows up, he is there. When Lady needs him, he is reachable. Their physical separation, since Lady largely lives in her family's barn while Jake lives in the treehouse with Finn, is one of those structural realities of the show that could easily be read as a flaw in his commitment. But Jake maintains both relationships, with Lady and with Finn, with a genuine investment that never seems to diminish in either direction. He does not sacrifice one for the other. He finds a way to be enough in both places. The model of love that Jake demonstrates with Lady is built on a few simple things. Full presence when they are together, genuine interest in her experience and her inner life. The willingness to do the work of access, to learn the language, literal and figurative, that makes real communication possible. And a kind of easy contentment with the relationship as it is, rather than a constant anxiety about whether it should be something different. He also respects her autonomy completely. Lady is not a dependent or a sidekick. She has her own life, her own capabilities, her own voice in all the decisions that affect both of them. The relationship is equal in a way that the show makes look simple and natural, even though genuine equality in partnership is actually one of the harder things to achieve. Their children, Charlie TV, Viola, Jake Jr., and Kim Kil-won, are the living, stretchy, rainbow-hued evidence of this partnership. 5 beings who carry both of their parents in ways that are recognizable and ways that are entirely new, who have capabilities neither parent possesses, who grow up to be genuinely distinct people with their own philosophies and values and lives. Jake loves all of them. Imperfectly, we will spend much more time on that shortly, but genuinely, without condition or reservation, in the way that Jake loves everything he loves, with his whole self, not necessarily well, but completely. The lesson Jake and Lady together offer is something like this. Real love is not a dramatic performance. It is not constantly rescuing or being rescued. It is not the tense electricity of 2 people who are not sure the relationship will last. Real love is the daily choice made mostly without fanfare to be present for someone, to stay, to care, to build slowly and imperfectly the specific and irreplaceable thing that only exists between 2 particular people who have decided to keep showing up for each other. That is what Jake and Lady have. It is not the most dramatic love story in Adventure Time. It is the most real one. Section 7, Jake the Dad, Fatherhood, Imperfection, and the Impossible Task of Being Someone's Parent. When Lady Rainicorn gives birth to 5 puppies at the beginning of Adventure Time's 5th season, Jake becomes a father overnight. And the speed of that transition is even more disorienting than it sounds, because Rainicorn offspring grow at an accelerated rate that means his children go from newborn to essentially adult within the span of a few days. Jake is simultaneously a new father and almost immediately a father of grown children. He never had the years of gradual adjustment that most parents get. He had Tuesday. The episode Jake the Dad is one of the most honest things Adventure Time ever does with Jake's character. It is funny, deeply specifically funny, and it is also quietly devastating in the way it depicts someone discovering that love for someone does not automatically translate into knowing how to help them. Jake loves his children completely. He also has absolutely no idea what to do with 5 magical half-dog, half-rainicorn infants who can teleport and change colors and are growing visibly between breakfast and lunch. He consults Mom's Manual, a guidebook his mother Margaret left behind, with the earnest desperation of someone who believes that parenting must be a learnable skill if he can just find the right instructions. The manual gives him advice. Some of it is wrong, or at least inapplicable to the specific situation of magical hybrid infants in a post-apocalyptic fantasy land. He throws a children's book out the window because the manual advises he should, and it lands in front of a fox who reads it as a non-fiction guide to eating babies. There are consequences. What the episode captures is the particular anxiety of new parenthood, the gap between how much you love the small beings in your care and how little that love equips you with actual skills. Jake is enormously capable in many domains. He can become a submarine. He has survived dozens of genuinely life-threatening adventures. He is a good friend, a good brother, a good partner. None of that experience translates cleanly into knowing how to be a father, because fatherhood is its own discipline entirely, and it has to be learned from inside the experience of doing it. The children grow up with alarming speed and become their own people. They are wildly different from each other and from both of their parents. Charlie inherits something of Jake's casual power and Lady's color shifting. TV, the son, is soft-spoken and gentle. Viola is musically gifted. Kim Kil-won becomes a serious, successful businessman, almost the inverse of Jake in personality, tight-wound and achievement-focused, where his father is loose and spontaneous. Jake Jr. is fierce and funny and unimpressed by her father's nonsense. Jake's fatherhood is notably imperfect. The episode Ocarina makes this very clear. Jake shows up 3 hours late to his own children's birthday party. He has forgotten to bring anything, or nearly anything. He has a pocket full of cold macaroni salad that he produces as if this constitutes an adequate contribution to a party. He does not see anything wrong with this behavior. He cheers "We're real late," as if being late is an adventure rather than a failure. Kim Kil-won, in response to a pattern of what he perceives as neglect and a failure of fatherly responsibility, buys the deed to the treehouse, Jake and Finn's home, from Marceline. He converts it into a 37-unit apartment building. He is trying to force Jake to grow up, to take on responsibility, to understand the basics of adult accountability. What is interesting is that the episode does not entirely side with either of them. Kim Kil-won's methods are aggressive and somewhat cruel, and his vision of what his father should be, a responsible, financially minded, consistent adult, is colored by Kim Kil-won's own personality and values, which are not his father's. Jake does need to be better about showing up. But Jake also does not need to become Kim Kil-won in order to be a good father. The resolution is one of the most quietly perfect moments in the series. Jake, understanding finally what his son actually needs, goes to Kim Kil-won's house. He does not bring money or a formal apology or a plan for self-improvement. He brings an ocarina. A handmade ocarina, except it is not hollow and therefore cannot actually produce sound and is technically not an ocarina at all, but rather just a clay lump with grooves in it. Jake presents it anyway, along with a simple repeated declaration, "I love you." And Kim Kil-won accepts it. He gives the treehouse back. Because what he needed was not a better performing father. He needed to know that his father thought about him and cared enough to try, even badly. The gesture outweighs the execution. The love underneath the failed object is more real than a perfectly playable instrument would have been. This moment contains a complete theory of parenting, or maybe of love more broadly. The goal is not to get everything right. The goal is to make the effort to reach towards someone in a way that communicates that they matter to you, and then to let that communication do its work regardless of how imperfect the execution. Jake's relationship with his own father Joshua casts a long shadow over his fatherhood. Joshua was tough, sometimes harshly so. He designed a dungeon to force his sons and Finn towards strength. He pushed, he made demands. He left pre-recorded instructions instead of being there in person. And yet Jake wears Joshua's hat when his children are born. He does not reject his father's legacy. He takes what was good and real in it, the genuine love underneath the demanding exterior, and tries to express it differently. With more presence, with more openness, with a useless ocarina rather than a gauntlet of traps. He does not perfectly succeed, but the trying matters, the reaching matters. And Jake's children, for all the ways he has let them down and failed to show up, know that they are loved. Because Jake has made sure of that even when he has done almost everything else wrong. There is a line from the episode Jake the Dad that sticks with you long after the episode ends. Jake Jr., grown up in a matter of days, telling her father that the manual is a bunch of junk. And Jake, hearing those words, suddenly remembers a moment from his own childhood when he said almost the same thing, when his mother tried to get him to run from a snake and he punched it instead. The memory does not change what Jake Jr. said, but it contextualizes it as continuity, as proof that she is his daughter, that she has inherited his specific brand of stubborn, brave, slightly reckless engagement with the world. And Jake laughs the way you laugh when you see yourself in someone else and feel the shock and warmth of recognition. That is the gift of parenthood that Adventure Time is quietly pointing toward. Not that you will do it well, you will not always do it well, but that in doing it at all, in being present for the messy, accelerated, impossible business of raising other people, you discover yourself reflected in ways you did not expect. You meet your past, you see your patterns. You find the places where you need to change, and the places where what you are is exactly what your children need. Jake the Dad is imperfect, loving, frequently late, and ultimately the father his children needed, not the one they thought they wanted. That distinction is everything. Section 8, Abstract, Identity Change and the Soul That Knows Its Own Shape. Near the end of Adventure Time's run, during the Season 9 Elements miniseries, something happens to Jake that pushes the entire question of identity to the foreground in a more urgent way than anything that has come before. Jake undergoes a physical transformation. His body changes, he becomes blue, multi-eyed, alien in appearance, he sprouts wings. He gains new abilities, including the capacity to taste the emotional history of objects, sensing in the texture of his breakfast toast the experience the wheat went through being ground into flour. He is, in some fundamental sense, different. The episode Abstract is entirely about what this change means, or more precisely, about Jake's struggle to accept that it does not necessarily mean what everyone around him seems to think it means. The people in Jake's life find his new form unsettling. Finn cannot look directly at him. BMO is visibly frightened. Even strangers in bars react with obvious discomfort to Jake's five-eyed blue alien appearance. Everyone seems to be operating from the assumption that the physical change signals a deeper change, that this is not Jake anymore, or at least not fully Jake. Jake's response to this is initially defensive. He insists repeatedly that he is same old Jake. He does not understand why his external form should be evidence of internal change. He is still himself. The fact that he looks different does not change that. His memories are intact, his values are intact, his love for his family and his sense of humor and his essential approach to the world, all of it is intact. But the episode complicates his certainty, because Jake is troubled by a dream involving his brother Jermaine, and the trouble is revealing. Jermaine, who has always been strictly a realist painter, is making abstract art in the dream, and Jake's reaction to this is disproportionate distress. He is frightened by the idea that Jermaine has changed in this way. He interprets it as a sign that something is wrong, that Jermaine is in danger, that his personality has been altered in a way that constitutes a kind of loss. Jake goes to find Jermaine, and Jermaine is fine. Jermaine has simply opened his mind. He used to hate abstract art because he could not access it. Its refusal to represent identifiable reality felt like a failure of communication to him. But at some point, something shifted, and he began to be able to receive what abstract art was offering. He did not lose himself in that shift, he expanded. When Jake understands this, when he lets Jermaine's evolution be evidence of growth rather than damage, something loosens in him. He realizes that his own anxiety about his physical transformation has been based on a false premise, that change is inherently a loss of self, that the things you fear losing about yourself are actually the things that can survive change, because they are not located in the body or the form, but in something more persistent. Adventure Time gives this idea its most poetic formulation through another Jake quote that is circulated widely. As long as I know the shape of my soul, I'll be all right. It is not immediately obvious what that means, and maybe that is appropriate for something so personal. The shape of the soul is a metaphor for the core of a person, the constellation of values, relationships, memories, and ways of being that constitute a continuous self across all the changes that time and experience bring. You can change physically. You can change emotionally. You can gain new capabilities and lose old ones, move to new places and leave old habits behind, transform in ways that would be unrecognizable to an earlier version of yourself. But if you know who you are at the level of the soul, if you can feel the shape of the thing that makes you, regardless of what exterior circumstances are doing, then you will be all right. You are not lost, you are just in a new form. Jake returns to his original appearance by the end of Abstract. He finds his way back through acceptance rather than resistance, by releasing the fear of change rather than fighting his way back to a previous state. The physical transformation is a consequence of his alien heritage expressing itself, and understanding that heritage, accepting it as part of his origin story, allows him to integrate it rather than be colonized by it. There is something profound about the way this works. He does not become his alien nature. He does not abandon his Jake nature. He holds both, the way a person can be shaped by every environment they have moved through without being identical to any of them. You are the product of everything that made you, and you are more than any one of those things, and the self that persists through all of it, the shape of the soul, is both incredibly fragile and incredibly durable at the same time. The episode also quietly addresses something about Jake's consistent tendency to minimize significant changes in his life. A reviewer of Adventure Time noted that Jake's character throughout the series is defined by a pattern of treating enormous shifts as if they are manageable and barely noticeable, a coping mechanism that is partly genuine equanimity and partly defensive avoidance. Abstract is the moment when that mechanism comes under examination. When Jake's instinct to say same old Jake is gently challenged by the reality that some things have changed, and the way through is not to insist they have not, but to understand what that means and what it does not mean. What does not change is the soul's shape. What changes is everything else. And everything else is allowed to change, because that is what living in time means. Section 9. Warren Ampersand and the question of chosen identity. Being more than your origins, Jake's encounter with Warren Ampersand and Jake the Starchild is the culmination of a mystery that Adventure Time has been building toward for years. The question of where Jake's powers actually come from and what the full truth of his origin story might mean for who he is. Warren arrives presenting himself as Jake's biological father. This is technically true. Warren is the extra-dimensional shapeshifter whose bite infected Joshua and produced the DNA that became Jake. He takes Jake to his home planet Nera, which is presented as a thriving civilization built entirely around Jake as a prophesied figure. There are statues of Jake everywhere. There is a museum of his life history, with Warren watching from the edges of photographs that Jake never knew were being taken. There is a prophecy about Jake defeating a great monster named Ixcano. Warren gives Jake a belt that reads Galaxy Savior. Warren himself wears a belt that reads Proud Pop. It is, on the surface, a remarkably complete kind of love. A parent who has spent decades watching his child from a distance, who has built an entire world in that child's honor, who has preserved memories and named a planet and waited with enormous patience for the moment of reunion. It is entirely fabricated. Every building, every alien, every worshipper, every element of the civilization Jake sees on Nera is Warren Ampersand, stretched and shaped into an elaborate stage set. The prophecy about Ixcano is itself a construction. Ixcano is Warren wearing a different shape, presenting a threat that Jake is destined to defeat so that he will bond with his father and trust the process. The belt that absorbs Jake's power as a conduit is exactly what it sounds like, a mechanism designed to drain Jake's shape-shifting abilities and transfer them to Warren, extending Warren's life at Jake's expense. Warren has done this to countless children before. It is the whole point. He generates heirs, nurtures them from a distance until they are fully powered, and then harvests them. The emotional manipulation involved in all of this is sophisticated and deeply ugly. Warren is not just lying to Jake. He is constructing an entire reality designed to make Jake feel seen, chosen, beloved, cosmically significant, and to leverage all of those feelings as vectors for theft. He is weaponizing the primal human, or dog, desire to be known by one's parent to be claimed, to matter to the one whose biology you carry. Jake figures it out. He switches the belts. He lets Warren drain his power and then retrieves it. He does not deliver a long speech about betrayal or the nature of real fatherhood or the difference between biological connection and earned relationship. He simply throws Warren Ampersand into a black hole. It is one of the most matter-of-fact expressions of moral clarity in the entire show. Jake is not angry in a performative way. He is not devastated. He processes the situation and responds to it appropriately, which in this case means ending the threat and going home. And here is the interesting philosophical weight of this moment. Jake had the option of wanting Warren to be real. He could have chosen to believe the fiction. The fiction was appealing, an alien father who had always been watching, a destiny of cosmic heroism, a civilization that existed to honor him. That is a seductive story. Many people would not have looked for the seams in it because looking for the seams means risking the loss of something that feels like belonging. Jake looked for the seams because Jake has always known at some level where his belonging actually lives. It does not live in cosmic destiny or biological inheritance or a planet built in his image. It lives in a treehouse with Finn. It lives in Lady Rainicorn's barn. It lives in his children's weird, stretchy, rainbow-hued faces. It lives in the specific, unreplicable texture of the life he has actually built over the years he has actually lived. Warren Ampersand gave Jake his shape-shifting ability. Joshua and Margaret gave him a home. Joshua and Margaret are his parents. Warren is a creature who exploited him, and Jake responds to the discovery of that exploitation with the same practical directness he brings to every problem. He eliminates the threat and moves on. This is a statement about nature and nurture that is as clear as Adventure Time ever gets. Your origins do not determine your identity. The DNA that constructed your body is not the blueprint for your soul. What you become is shaped by the relationships you enter, the choices you make, the people you choose to love and protect and come home to. Jake is the child of Joshua and Margaret in every way that matters, regardless of whose alien biology is expressed in his shape-shifting cells. He is also, and this is important, entirely unbothered by the discovery that his origins are stranger than he thought. He does not have an identity crisis about being half-alien. He does not feel less himself because the mud puddle story turned out to be wrong. The truth of his origin is simply another piece of information about the universe he lives in. Interesting, relevant, and ultimately not something that requires him to revise his understanding of who he is. Because who he is was never really a question about origin. It was always a question about choice. About what he values, about how he lives, about who he shows up for and who shows up for him and the accumulated mass of ordinary days that constitute a real life. You are not what made you, you are what you make. Jake demonstrates this as clearly and simply as anything in Adventure Time. The alien DNA is in him. Warren Ampersand is in a black hole. Jake is going home to make bacon pancakes. Section 10, Together Again, Death, the Afterlife, and Jake's final lesson, Adventure Time, ends its original 10-season run in 2018, and the show's universe continues in the form of 4 HBO Max specials under the banner Adventure Time, Distant Lands, released between 2020 and 2021. The third of these specials is called Together Again, and it begins with a title card that reads, simply, Finn and Jake are dead. That is how we find out. No dramatic buildup, no extended final scene in the original series. Just a title card at the start of a special matter of fact, the way the show has always handled its most important information. Finn and Jake are dead, and it turns out their greatest adventure is the one that happens after. This is consistent with Jake's philosophy in a way that rewards thinking about. Jake's relationship with death throughout the series has always been characterized by an acceptance that most of the other characters in the show cannot quite access. He is not cavalier about it. He does not seek danger unnecessarily or treat mortality as abstract and therefore ignorable. But he has always seemed to understand that death is a shape life takes, not a thing that arrives from outside to steal life away. He has lived in a world where death is continuous and present. He has lost his parents. He has watched friends and enemies and strangers cycle through endings. He has on many occasions faced the genuine possibility of his own death and navigated those moments with the same quality of attention he brings to everything else. Focused, present, without excessive drama. When we meet the afterlife version of Finn and Jake in Together Again, we discover that Jake has been in the 50th Dead World, the highest and most beautiful of the afterlife's 50 levels. He has been there for what appears to be a very long time in a state of peace that reads as genuine rather than performed. He is happy, not in a way that denies the absence of the people he loved, but in a way that is possible apparently because Jake made peace with his life before it ended. Finn, by contrast, has been going through the 50 Dead Worlds looking for Jake. He has crossed through dozens of strange landscapes, encountered the remnants of characters from their adventures together, moved through hell-adjacent territories and surreal dreamscapes, all in pursuit of his brother. When he finally finds Jake, the reunion is joyful and warm and funny in the way that only Finn and Jake together ever are, with their specific language of brotherly affection that involves cheering and fist bumps and a kind of easy physical closeness that communicates decades of shared history. But Finn also admits something in this special that reframes his entire life after Jake's death. He was living, he was going on adventures. He had things to do and people to care about and a life worth living. But deep down, he was also just waiting until he could die and be with Jake again. The loss of his brother was not something he had fully made peace with. It was a wound he had been moving around. Jake, hearing this, does not make it heavy. He does not perform sorrow about the time Finn spent in absence of him. He is there now. They are together now, and that is what matters. The threat and together again comes from a corrupted entity called New Death, the son of death and life, who has been manipulated by the Lich into controlling the afterlife with cruelty, denying souls passage between dead worlds, trapping the dead in conditions they did not deserve. Finn and Jake, being Finn and Jake, do not accept this state of affairs. They move through the dead worlds the way they always moved through dungeons and kingdoms and nightmare dimensions, together complementary, each covering for the other's gaps. At the end, with New Death defeated and Mr. Fox, the new custodian of the afterlife, offering everyone free passage to their proper dead worlds, Finn and Jake face a choice. Finn can be reincarnated, sent back into a new life, a new form, set of experiences. He wants to do this. He is ready to begin again. Jake's choice is less clear. He has been in the 50th dead world. He has been at peace. He could stay. He does not stay. At the last possible moment, Jake runs for the portal. He rushes to join Finn, the way he has always rushed toward Finn, without thinking too hard about it, without weighing the metaphysical considerations, without needing to fully understand what comes next. He goes because Finn is going. He goes because Finn has always been where he was going. They fist bump one final time. They enter the reincarnation together. The screen goes white. They are together again. The final moment of Jake's story is this. He had everything he needed in the 50th dead world. Peace, beauty, rest, the absence of suffering. He gave it up to jump through a portal with his brother because his brother was jumping through a portal. Not out of obligation, not out of heroism. Out of love and the simple and absolute recognition that wherever Finn was going, that was where Jake wanted to be. This is the philosophical culmination of everything Jake represents. The deepest form of Jake's wisdom is not the witty observation or the casual profound statement or the ability to find contentment in the present moment. It is this: love is not a condition of life that you maintain. It is a practice you enact continuously in every direction. And when the moment comes, the final moment, the moment where you could rationally and legitimately choose something else, the practice takes over. You run for the portal, you go with the person you love, not because it is the logical choice, because it is the only choice that makes any sense of everything that came before it. Jake spent his whole life demonstrating this, in the way he helped Finn through every heartbreak, in the way he learned Korean for Lady Rainicorn, in the way he made a useless ocarina for Kim Kil-won and said, "I love you" instead of anything else, in the way he showed up, imperfectly and completely, for the people who needed him to show up. The 50th dead world could wait. Finn was jumping, Jake ran. The sum of Jake, what all of it means. If you try to distill Jake's philosophy into a single clean statement, you lose something. His wisdom does not compress cleanly because it was never delivered in compressed form. It accumulated over 10 seasons and 4 specials and hundreds of moments both enormous and tiny, into something that is more like a way of inhabiting the world than a set of propositions to be memorized. But if you were going to try, if you were going to sit with everything Jake is and everything he does and everything he says across the full arc of his existence, you might arrive at something like this. Be present. In the body you have right now, in the life you are living right now, with the people who are actually there. Not the imagined better life that would begin once some problem was solved, some change was made, some threshold was crossed. This life, these people right now, be flexible. Not in the spineless sense of having no convictions. In the structural sense of being able to adapt to what reality is actually doing without shattering. Stretch when stretching is required. Compress when compression is required. Return to yourself when the situation no longer requires you to be something else. Love specifically. Not in the abstract, not as a general philosophical position, but with specific named irreplaceable people. Learn their language. Show up for their birthday parties even when you are late. Make them an ocarina that doesn't actually work. Say I love you as many times as it needs to be said. Know the shape of your soul. The interior thing that persists through every external change, that is present in you across every version of yourself you have been and every version you will be. Know it well enough that when everything else shifts, you can locate yourself by it. And when the moment comes to run for the portal, when the choice between safety and love is actually on the table, run. Jake the dog is a yellow magical shapeshifter who makes excellent bacon pancakes and once spent several days being a brick. He is also one of the most completely realized philosophical characters in the history of animated television, precisely because his philosophy never announces itself. It exists in the accumulated texture of how he lives. It is expressed in what he makes for breakfast and how he talks to his brother and the decision, made once and made at the very end of everything, to throw himself through a portal rather than stay in a place of perfect peace without the person he loved most. He is silly and lazy and imperfect, and occasionally oblivious and endlessly warm and genuinely, specifically wise in ways that take years to fully appreciate. He is Jake. He is same old Jake all the way to the end, and that is all he ever needed to be. If you have made it this far, you are either asleep or deeply, specifically committed to understanding why a cartoon dog said some of the truest things about life ever animated, and honestly, both of those are exactly where I wanted you to end up. Drop a like if Jake's philosophy hit different for you tonight. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. There is always more of Ooh left to explore. And leave me a comment. What is the most Jake quote that has ever lived rent-free in your head? I want to know. Sleep well, stretch out, know the shape of your soul, it is enough. Section 11, the JT. Dog Zone years. Jake's relationship with love advice and the danger of thinking you know more than you do. Before Jake was the settled, warm, slightly imperfect father figure we come to know across the later seasons of Adventure Time, he was JT. Dog Zone. This is the pen name under which Jake wrote a series of books about dating and relationships, apparently achieved considerable notoriety for them, and dispensed romantic advice to Finn with the absolute confidence of someone who considers themselves an expert. The books have titles, they have a readership. Jake talks about them with the casual pride of someone who genuinely believes he has cracked something open. The JT. Dog Zone persona is one of the funniest recurring gags in the early seasons of the show, and like most of the show's comedy, it contains within it something more substantive than the joke on its surface. Jake's dating advice is sincere. He genuinely believes what he is dispensing. He has developed a system, a tiered framework for romantic escalation with specific rules about what constitutes appropriate pacing, and he presents this system to Finn with the authority of a certified expert in a field he has, at best, partially understood. The system does not always work. In fact, it frequently produces results that were not anticipated. Misunderstandings, hurt feelings, situations that would have resolved better if Finn had just talked directly to the person he liked instead of running Jake's complicated play. And Jake, to his credit, notices this. He does not defend the system past the point of evidence. When the evidence is against the system requires revision. What the JT. Dog Zone phase reveals about Jake is something specific and important. He is not a humble person in the self-deprecating sense of the word. He has genuine confidence, genuine self-assurance, a settled relationship with his own capabilities that does not require constant external validation. That confidence is usually well placed. But it is also occasionally overextended into territory he does not know as well as he thinks he does. Love is a territory where most people's confidence exceeds their actual competence, including people who have written books about it. Jake has a real relationship with Lady Rainicorn that is warm and functional and clearly works for both of them. But relationships are not universal. What works in one situation does not necessarily transfer cleanly to different people in different circumstances with different emotional histories. The mistake is not the confidence. The mistake is assuming that the specific lessons of his own experience constitute a general law. This is actually a very common and very human mistake, and one of the more honest things the show does with Jake's character in the early seasons is let that mistake play out naturally. He does not learn it once and then stop making it. He learns it gradually, revision by revision, as the evidence accumulates that the world of love is larger and more varied than his personal experience of it can fully map. By the later seasons of the show, Jake's romantic advice to Finn has become something very different from the Dog Zone playbook. It is less systematic and more honest. Less, here is the correct move, and more, here is what I have noticed about how people actually seem to work, based on watching a lot of people try to love each other and fail and try again. He shifts from expert to witness, and the shift makes his advice immeasurably more useful. There is a specific moment in the series that crystallizes this evolution. When Finn is grappling with his feelings after the Flame Princess relationship ends, Jake does not hand him a new playbook. He sits with him, he acknowledges that it hurts. He does not try to shortcut the grief by offering a replacement narrative or a system that will make the next one go better. He just stays. That staying, that willingness to be present with someone in a difficulty rather than trying to fix the difficulty, is more valuable than any framework Jake ever sold under a pen name. The JT Dog Zone years are not a failure in Jake's personal development. They are a chapter. A necessary one in the way that overconfidence is often necessary, because it takes you places that appropriate caution would not, and some of what you learn in those places is genuinely useful. Jake had to believe he understood love enough to write books about it before he could discover what he did not yet understand. The books are not worthless. The confidence that produced them is not worthless. It is just incomplete. What Jake arrives at over the course of the series is something that looks from the outside like humility but feels on the inside like something more like wisdom. Not the loss of confidence, but its refinement. Not I don't know anything, but I know some things, and I know I don't know everything, and I am genuinely curious about the parts I don't know yet. That is a better place to give advice from than the certainty of the dog zone system, and it is a better place to live from generally. The shift from dog zone confidence to genuine relational wisdom tracks with Jake's broader development as a character. The movement from someone who is mostly coasting on natural ease and charm to someone who has actually earned what he knows through paying attention to what has not worked and being willing to be wrong about it. It also tracks with something real about how wisdom actually develops in people. You do not become wise by reading the right books or finding the right teacher. You become wise by accumulating experience, paying attention to it, being willing to update your model of the world when the evidence requires it, and doing that repeatedly over a long enough period that the accumulation becomes something more than the sum of its individual lessons. Jake does all of that. Slowly, without making a project of it, almost by accident, the way the best personal development usually happens, not as a deliberate campaign of self-improvement, but as the natural consequence of living attentively. Section 12. Music, food, and the small rituals of a good life. There is a tendency, when writing about a character like Jake, to focus on the dramatic moments, the moments of crisis and revelation, the episodes that feature major plot developments or emotionally heightened encounters. Those moments are genuinely important, and we have spent real time with many of them in this script. But Jake's philosophy is not primarily located in the dramatic moments. It is located in the spaces between them, in the ordinary texture of his daily life, which he inhabits with a completeness and a richness that is itself a kind of argument about what a good life is. Jake cooks. He cooks a lot, and he is good at it, and the cooking is not incidental to his character. It is one of the clearest expressions of it. The bacon pancake song is the most famous example, but it is not the only one. Jake makes sandwiches with the intensity of an artist who has developed a specific vision over years of dedicated practice. When he uses his one cosmic wish at Prismo's time room, the wish that could literally be anything, that could reshape the universe, that other characters use to make world-altering requests, Jake uses it for a sandwich. A perfect sandwich. This has been read as a joke, and it is also genuinely a joke, and it is also not only a joke. Jake wishes for a sandwich because a sandwich is what Jake actually wants in that moment, not power, not immortality, not the resolution of some deep unfulfilled desire sandwich. And the show lets this be uncomplicated. It does not punish him for the smallness of the wish. It does not imply that he should have wished for something bigger. He wanted a sandwich. He got the sandwich. He ate the sandwich. He was satisfied. There is a kind of philosophical clarity in that sequence that is genuinely difficult to achieve and almost never represented in fiction, where characters who are given cosmic power are almost universally expected to deploy it toward cosmic ends. Jake's cosmic wish for a sandwich is a statement about scale, about the relationship between what is available and what is actually needed, about the way that very large things are often used to pursue very small satisfactions that could have been obtained by much simpler means, and about the possibility of knowing clearly enough what you want that you don't get lost in the gap between what is possible and what is good. The sandwich wish is also a callback to an even earlier moment in the series, from the episode The Limit, where Jake uses a wish in a different magical context, also for a sandwich. The repetition is deliberate. It is the show making sure you understand that this is not a one-time gag. This is who Jake is. Across multiple contexts, across different kinds of magical wish-granting opportunities, given the option to ask for anything, Jake asks for a sandwich. Because a sandwich is genuinely what he wants. Because his wants are genuinely that legible to him. Because he is not reaching past what is real in search of what is hypothetically better. Music operates similarly in Jake's life. The viola, the improvised songs, the way he treats sound as an ambient expression of whatever he is experiencing at any given moment. These are not performances for an audience. They are Jake in relationship with his own inner life, using sound the way some people use physical movement or visual art as a way of processing and expressing the texture of what it is to be alive at this particular moment. He does not play the viola to be good at the viola. He plays it because it makes him feel something that is worth feeling. This relationship with creative activity, doing it for the intrinsic experience rather than for an external outcome, is something that most people have had at some point and many people have lost somewhere along the way. The childhood relationship with making things, with playing music or drawing pictures or building structures, is usually untouched by the question of whether you are good at it or whether it is productive or whether it has an audience. You do it because the doing feels like something. Jake maintains that relationship into adulthood, into the middle of a life full of genuine responsibilities and genuine demands. He makes the song anyway, he plays the viola anyway. Not because he has figured out a productivity hack that makes creative play compatible with adult life, but because he has never agreed with the premise that creative play is incompatible with adult life. The small rituals of Jake's daily life, the cooking, the music, the specific pleasures he returns to over and over, are not distractions from his real life. They are his real life. They are the texture of the days that make up the years that make up the whole arc of who he is. And the fact that he honors them, returns to them, protects them from the encroachment of more urgent-seeming things is one of the clearest expressions of his philosophy. Life is made of ordinary days. Most of what we experience is ordinary. The heroic moments, the dramatic turning points, the peak experiences, these are scattered across the much larger mass of days that are just days, mornings that are just mornings, afternoons that are just afternoons. What you do with the ordinary days, how you inhabit the mornings, whether you make the song while you are making breakfast, this is what your life is actually made of. Jake understands this and lives accordingly. Section 13, the treehouse is home. What Jake teaches us about belonging and place, the treehouse that Jake and Finn share throughout Adventure Time, is not just a setting. It is a character. It has been there through every season of the show, standing in the same patch of ooh, slightly absurd and slightly magical. A place that functions as home in the full and specific sense of the word, not just shelter, not just location, but the physical expression of a relationship. Jake is deeply attached to the treehouse. When Kim Kil-won, his adult son, buys the deed to it and converts it into apartments, Jake's response is revealing. He does not respond primarily as someone who has lost property. He responds as someone who has lost home, which is a different and more serious thing. The treehouse is where he and Finn have lived the whole arc of their shared life. It contains the accumulated weight of every ordinary morning and every extraordinary adventure. To lose it is not to lose square footage. It is to lose a physical record of who they have been together. The show is thoughtful about what makes a place home, rather than just a building. It is not the architecture, it is not the possessions it contains. It is the relationships that have been lived inside it, the fights that have been had in it and resolved in it, the meals cooked in its kitchen and the nights slept in its beds, and the quiet mornings when nothing was happening, and that was exactly right. The treehouse is home because Jake and Finn have filled it with those things over years together. Jake's attachment to the treehouse is also an expression of his attachment to stability within freedom. He is an adventurer, he goes out, he faces danger, he moves through the wide and strange world of ooh. But he comes back, he always comes back. The treehouse is the anchor that makes the wandering possible. It is the place the adventures are departures from and returns to. Without it, the adventures would be something different, less adventure and more displacement. Having a home makes being away from home meaningful. It makes the return possible. When Jake is separated from the treehouse, or when the treehouse is threatened, the emotional register of the show shifts subtly but perceptibly. Something is wrong. Something that should be stable is unstable. This is not a small thing. The stability of home is one of the things that makes everything else, including risk, including growth, including the willingness to go into dangerous situations, possible. This is a philosophical point that is easy to overlook in a culture that tends to celebrate rootlessness, that treats the willingness to move, to leave, to start fresh as a kind of courage or freedom. Jake does not have contempt for rootedness. He has built something and he values it. The treehouse is not a limitation on his freedom. It is a foundation for it. Having somewhere to come back to is not the same as being unable to leave. There is also something worth noting about the way Jake and Finn share the treehouse rather than each living separately. Their cohabitation is not described as a transitional arrangement, a temporary solution before they each find something more appropriate for their individual lives. It is presented as the right arrangement, two people who have chosen to organize their daily lives around each other because that is what they want, because being near each other is genuinely better than being apart. The treehouse is the physical form of their brotherhood, the concrete expression of the choice they make every day to be in each other's lives. Jake's willingness to share space, to organize his life around proximity to someone he loves, is an extension of his broader philosophy of relationship. Love is not just a feeling, it is a set of choices about how to arrange your daily life. It is the decision to be nearby, to have breakfast together, to be the person who is there when the thing happens. Jake makes the decision repeatedly, consistently, across the entire run of the show. The treehouse is how you see it. It is the decision made physical. Section 14, Fear, Courage, and the thing Jake admitted he could not face. There is a moment in Adventure Time in the episode Crystals Have Power, where Jake admits something that comes as a genuine surprise, given everything we know about him. He has taken a vow of nonviolence. He refuses to fight. He says, with a kind of unusual seriousness that Jake reserves for things that actually matter to him, that there is something in himself that he has been ignoring for a long time, something he is afraid of. This is a remarkably vulnerable thing for a character who is usually defined by ease and confidence to say. Jake is afraid of something inside himself. The episode does not fully elaborate on what that something is. It gestures toward a fear of violence, of the capacity for rage, of what it might mean to let go of restraint in a context where he has real power to harm. His father Joshua's voice appearing in the episode as a kind of spectral presence urges him to punch, to fight, to use his power. Jake resists. He says, "Stupid ghost dad," and keeps resisting. The vow of nonviolence does not last the episode. The situation eventually demands that Jake fight, and he does. But the moment of vulnerability, the admission that there is stuff about himself that he has been avoiding, that he is afraid of it, that moment is real and it persists past the specific context of the episode. Jake is not a person who has fully resolved his interior. He has not achieved some perfect enlightened state where everything difficult about being himself has been processed and integrated. He has avoided things. He has had strategies for not looking at the parts of himself that are uncomfortable. The casual ease, the laid-back humor, the ability to let things roll off him. These are real, but they are also occasionally methods of not engaging with things that are genuinely difficult. This is important because it makes Jake's wisdom feel earned rather than given. He is not wise because he is simple or because he does not have difficult inner content to navigate. He is wise because he has found a way of being in the world that works for him despite the difficult inner content. The ease is not the absence of difficulty. It is a response to difficulty that has developed over time through whatever internal work he has done on himself and continues to do. The abstract episode, which we discussed earlier in the script, is the later and deeper return to this theme, the moment when Jake's interior difficulty is externalized in a way that cannot be navigated by simply choosing not to look at it. His body changes, his inner alien nature makes itself visible. The stuff he has been ignoring for a long time becomes impossible to ignore. And the resolution, the way he finds his way back to himself, requires him to actually engage with what has changed, to understand it and integrate it rather than fight it. The path from Crystal's have power to abstract is a character arc spanning multiple seasons, and it is an arc about the slow, often deferred, ultimately unavoidable work of self-knowledge. Jake has avoided certain interior truths for most of the show. By the final seasons, he cannot avoid them anymore. And what he discovers when he actually looks is not that the truth is catastrophic, it is that he can hold it. That the shape of his soul is strong enough to contain the parts of him he was afraid of. That is not a given. That is something he worked toward imperfectly and in his own time, the way most actual growth happens, not according to a plan, not on a schedule, but when the moment finally arrives where there is no more room to look away. Jake is brave, not in the way of someone who feels no fear, in the way of someone who eventually looks at what he is afraid of and discovers that he can survive the looking. Section 15. The question of laziness. Jake's defense of doing less. Let us spend some time with the critique of Jake that runs through the show implicitly and occasionally explicitly, that he is lazy, that he could do more and chooses not to, that his ease and comfort seeking are indulgences that sometimes come at real cost to the people around him. This is not an unfair critique. Jake shows up late to his children's birthday party. He uses the treehouse's shared treasure room on frivolous things and leaves Finn in a difficult financial position. He allows Finn to handle difficulties that Jake could have intervened in more actively. There are moments throughout the series where Jake's preference for comfort and ease causes genuine harm, or at least genuine inconvenience, to people who needed more from him. The show does not excuse these moments. It allows them and their consequences to exist without rushing to redeem Jake by immediately making him do better. His imperfection in this area is persistent and real, and yet the show also does not endorse the reading that Jake's ease and comfort-seeking are simply failures of character requiring correction. It holds space for the possibility that Jake's relationship with effort and ambition, and the imperative to constantly be doing more is actually, in certain crucial ways, wise, and that the critique of him as lazy is sometimes a projection of values onto him that are not his values, and that he has not agreed to hold. The cultural norm around effort is quite intense. There is a broadly held belief that doing more is better than doing less, that being productive is morally superior to being at rest, that discomfort and striving are the marks of a good person, while ease and comfort are the marks of someone who is not trying hard enough. This belief is so pervasive that it often goes unexamined. We simply assume it. Of course you should be doing more. Of course the gap between what you are doing and what you could theoretically be doing is a problem that demands addressing. Jake does not hold this belief. Or if he does, he holds it much more lightly than the culture around him does. He has made a genuine assessment of what he needs, what his people need from him, and what the minimum level of effort looks like that keeps the important things intact. and he has decided that the level of effort that produces those outcomes is the level of effort he wants to apply. Not the maximum possible, not the culturally approved aspiration maximum, the sufficient level. This is not a prescription for everyone. Some people genuinely thrive on sustained high effort, on the continual push toward more and better, on the discomfort of reaching past what is easy into what is possible. Those people are not wrong about themselves. Jake is not wrong about himself either. He is operating on a clear and honest reading of who he is and what he actually wants, rather than the reading he is supposed to have according to some external standard. The critique of laziness also misses something about how Jake's ease actually functions in his relationships. His being easy to be around, his lack of anxious striving, his willingness to just be present and comfortable, rather than always pushing toward the next thing. These qualities are not just self-serving. They are gifts to the people around him. Finn, who has enormous energy and drive and urgency, is balanced by Jake's ease. The combination of their different relationships to effort and ambition makes them a better team than either would be without the other. Jake's ease gives Finn permission to rest. Finn's energy gives Jake the external motivation to engage when engagement is genuinely needed. There is also something to be said about the relationship between Jake's seeming laziness and his actual creativity. Some of the most interesting things Jake does in the show, including the Jake the Brick episode, which produced some of the most philosophically rich content in the entire series, come directly from his willingness to be idle, to not fill every moment with productive activity, to let himself exist in a state of open attention without a goal. Idleness is the precondition for that kind of discovery. If Jake were always busy, always optimizing, always producing, he would never have spent 3 days being a brick and found out what he found out. The defense of doing less is not a defense of not caring. It is a defense of the right relationship between effort and sufficiency, the recognition that the right amount of effort is not always the maximum amount, and that wisdom involves knowing the difference between sufficient and more than sufficient better than ambition does. Jake knows that difference, usually. He errs toward less more often than is always appropriate. But he also, in doing so, preserves something that the constantly affording, always striving version of himself would lose. The space to be fully present, to notice the rabbit, to make the bacon pancake song, to be available for whatever the moment actually requires rather than whatever the plan has scheduled. Section 16. What the future of Jake's bloodline says about the philosophy he left behind, one of the more quietly remarkable facts about Jake's legacy in Adventure Time's universe, is what his descendants do with the gifts he passed on. Jake dies at some point after the main series ends. This is confirmed obliquely in Distant Lands, and the exact nature and timing of his death is never specified. But the show gestures toward his legacy in ways that are worth taking seriously. The episode Grable's 1000 takes place 1,000 years after the main series and shows a future version of Ooh, in which Jake's descendants have apparently become significant figures. The granddaughter and grandson who appear in some of these forward-looking glimpses carry traces of Jake's shape-shifting heritage in their appearance and capabilities. The civilization they inhabit is strange and distant, but it is possible to see in it a continuity, something of Jake's way of being in the world carried forward through generations in forms he could never have anticipated. This matters because it reframes the question of what legacy means. Most of what we think of as legacy, the explicit things we teach, the words we leave behind, the direct and traceable influence we have on the people around us, is only a fraction of what we actually pass on. The larger portion is more diffuse. It is the tone of how we loved people, the quality of attention we brought to the ordinary days, the way we handled difficulty without making it into a constant performance, the small habits that accumulated over a lifetime into something that looked, from the outside, like character. Jake did not leave a philosophical treatise. He did not sit his children down and deliver a systematic account of his worldview. He cooked breakfast and played music and loved Lady Rainicorn in a settled daily way and threw himself through a portal with Finn at the last possible moment. He was Jake fully and specifically for as long as he was alive. And from the accumulated weight of him being precisely and thoroughly himself, his descendants inherit something. Not a philosophy in the formal sense, something more durable. The memory, however distant and diffused by time, of a person who chose joy, chose presence, chose love, chose to stretch toward the people who needed him and return to himself when the stretching was done. That memory, carried forward through generations in ways no one planned, is what legacy actually is. Not the deliberate construction of an influence. Not the strategic management of how you will be remembered. Just the lived truth of who you were, seeping forward through time in the people you affected, until it is so diluted it is barely traceable, and yet still somehow present. Jake's bloodline goes to space eventually. His descendants build things that reach toward stars. Whether any of them know the shape of the soul that started all of that, a yellow bulldog making bacon pancakes in a treehouse in the land of Ooh, is uncertain. But the reaching itself, the willingness to stretch toward what is unknown and not yet reachable, feels very much like him. The sum of Jake, what all of it means and why it stays with you, if you try to distill Jake's philosophy into a single clean statement, you lose something. His wisdom does not compress cleanly because it was never delivered in compressed form. It accumulated across 10 seasons and 4 specials and hundreds of moments both enormous and tiny into something that is more like a way of inhabiting the world than a set of propositions to be memorized. A way of being present in your own life, in your own skin, with the people who are actually there in front of you. But if you were going to sit with everything Jake is, all the stretching and the cooking and the bad advice and the good advice and the imperfect fatherhood and the perfect brotherhood and the alien heritage and the chosen family and the brick episode and the black hole and the running start through the portal, you might arrive at something like this. Be present. In the body you have right now, in the life you are living right now, with the people who are actually there. Not the imagined better life that would begin once some problem is solved, some change is made, some threshold is crossed. This life, these people. This ordinary Tuesday morning with the sun coming through the window and the smell of something cooking and someone you love somewhere nearby doing something unremarkable. Be flexible, not in the spineless sense of having no convictions. In the structural sense of being able to respond to what reality is actually doing, rather than insisting that reality conform to what you expected or planned for. Stretch when stretching is required. Compress when compression is required. Come back to yourself when the situation no longer requires you to be something else. The shape of your soul does not depend on the shape of your body, or your circumstances, or the form your life is currently taking. Know what you are for. Not in a grand cosmic sense necessarily, though that is available too, if that is what your life is pointing toward. In the small, immediate sense, know what you love, what you enjoy, what gives you genuine satisfaction as opposed to performed satisfaction. Jake loves bacon, pancakes, and jazz, and Lady and Finn and his children and stretching in the sun. He knows this with unusual clarity and acts accordingly. The clarity is not complicated, but it is genuinely hard-won, and it is the foundation of everything else. Suck at things. Try them anyway. Get sort of good at them. Find the pleasure in the sort of good phase, because that is the vast majority of what learning actually looks and feels like. And if you need to be excellent before you can enjoy the process, you will miss almost all of it. Let problems be what they are, not obstacles between you and the real life, but the material the real life is made of. The adventure that went badly, the relationship that required real work, the skill that took years to develop from nothing into something, these are not interruptions to the good life. They are the good life in the form that it actually takes in a world that is genuinely difficult. Stop sometimes and be a brick, narrate the rabbit's afternoon. Let yourself be moved by ordinary things which are not actually ordinary but only appear that way when you are not paying enough attention. The capacity to be moved by the ordinary is one of the things that makes life worth living, and it is a capacity that requires cultivation, requires the occasional choice to be still rather than productive, to be a witness rather than an agent, to simply receive what the world is offering without trying to do anything with it. Love specifically, loyally, imperfectly, and completely. Learn the language, whatever that means in your own life, whatever the work is that access requires. Make the ocarina. Show up late sometimes and apologize sincerely and try to do better without making the trying to do better into a performance of effort that is more about your own comfort than about the person you let down. Wear your father's hat and be something different from him and be grateful for both of those things simultaneously. Know the shape of your soul. Not as a permanent fixed thing, but as a pattern that persists through change, the you that will still be recognizably you on the other side of every transformation that time and experience and biology and circumstance bring. You can change, you will change, you are allowed to change. And the shape of the soul, if you know it well enough, will be there to come back to when the change has passed. And when the moment comes to run for the portal, when the choice is between comfort without love and love without comfort, run. Jake the dog is a yellow magical shapeshifter who makes excellent bacon pancakes and once spent several days being a brick and used a cosmic wish for a sandwich and threw his biological father into a black hole and wore his father's hat on the day he became a dad and once made a useless lump of clay and called it an ocarina and said, "I love you" over and over until it worked. He is one of the most completely realized philosophical characters in the history of animated television, precisely because his philosophy never announces itself. It exists in the accumulated texture of how he lives, in the texture of his choices, in the weight of small moments stacked on top of each other until they become something that looks from a distance like wisdom, and is. He is silly and lazy and frequently late and occasionally oblivious and endlessly warm and patient and funny in the exact right moment, and wise in the quiet sideways way that the best wisdom always works, arriving not as a lecture but as a sudden recognition of something you already knew, presented to you in language simple enough to have always been true, by a yellow bulldog who is just trying to get through the day and accidentally turns out to be right about almost everything that matters. He is Jake, all the way through. The same old Jake at the beginning and at the end and in every stretch of life between. And that is all he ever needed to be, everything he ever needed to be, more than enough. If you have made it this far, you are either asleep, which means this did exactly what it was supposed to do, or deeply specifically committed to understanding why a cartoon dog said some of the truest things about life ever animated. And honestly, both of those are exactly where I wanted you to end up. Drop a like if Jake's philosophy settled something in you tonight. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. There is always more of Ooh left to explore. And leave me a comment telling me your favorite Jake moment, or the Jake quote that has lived rent-free in your head for years. I want to know. Sleep well, stretch out, know the shape of your soul. It is enough. A final thought. Why Jake works as a sleep companion. There is something fitting about the fact that this script exists in the form it does. A long, slow, thorough drift through the philosophy of a character who spent several days being a brick to understand what stillness feels like. Jake the Brick was in some ways the episode that proved Adventure Time understood what it was doing better than almost any episode before or after it. It proved that the show knew its own deepest impulse was not action but attention. Not drama but presence. Not the episode that changes everything but the ordinary morning that makes changing possible. Jake is a good companion for the dark and quiet hours precisely because he does not demand your full attention. His wisdom does not require you to lean forward and concentrate. It seeps in sideways, the way he always delivers it, tucked into something relaxed, arriving with the ease of something that was always going to be true and has just now found its way into the room. His philosophy is not urgent. It does not have a deadline. The things he believes, that you need problems, that sucking is the first step, that the shape of your soul persists through everything, that you should run for the portal when the moment comes. These are the kinds of things that land differently at different times, and some of what settled into you tonight will not fully surface until some completely different morning weeks from now, when you are doing something ordinary, and something Jake said moves through you the way a familiar song moves through you when you did not know you remembered it. That is the best kind of wisdom, the kind that waits for you. The kind that you carry without knowing you are carrying it, and then suddenly it is exactly what you needed in exactly the moment you needed it. Jake trusted that. He lived it. He stretched toward everything that needed him, and he came back to himself, and he made the song while making the breakfast, and in the end he ran. Sleep well. Appendix. The quotes that last. There are certain Jake lines that people carry with them for years. Not because they are the most clever lines in the show, or the most surprising, but because they are the most true. They arrive at the right moment, and they stick, and you find them surfacing unbidden in the middle of completely different circumstances. While you are trying something difficult and failing, or sitting with someone you love in a moment of quiet, or facing a change you did not ask for and do not entirely know how to navigate. Sucking at something is the first step towards being sort of good at something. This one is almost unfairly portable. It applies to literally every beginning of everything. Every new skill, every new relationship, every new version of yourself you are trying to become. The first draft, the first attempt, the first conversation with a stranger who might become something more. The first day of a new life after an old one ended. You will suck at it first. That is the schedule. That is not a tragedy. That is Tuesday. To live life, you need problems. If you get everything you want the minute you want it, what's the point of living? This one lands differently at different ages. Younger people sometimes push back against it. Of course you want things to be easy. Of course you want the problems to go away. Older people tend to nod, because they have noticed by then that the things they would not trade in their lives are not the easy things. They are the things they worked for, the things that required them to stretch, the things that left marks. The problems were the point. It just took a while to see it. As long as I know the shape of my soul, I'll be all right. This one might be the most difficult to explain to someone who has not heard it in context, and yet the most immediately recognizable once you have experienced the thing it describes. The experience of changing, of finding yourself different from who you were in ways that feel disorienting and possibly threatening, and then finding underneath all of it that something essential is still there. Still intact, still recognizably you, the shape of the soul it persists. It is there to come back to. That knowledge, once you have it, is one of the most durable sources of stability that exists. And then there is the moment that is not a quote at all, just an action. The moment Jake runs for the portal. There are no words for it. There are just legs moving, because the person he loves is on the other side of that doorway, and eternity of peaceful rest is not as good as whatever comes next if they go through it together. That is the sentence Jake writes with his life in the end, not in words, in the running. That is enough, more than enough, that is everything.